Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hello Hot Flash. I'm here today with Jenn Trepeck. Jenn, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
Of course, so am I. So am I. Hey, you guys, Jenn is an optimal health coach, podcaster, and business consultant. She's been recognized as one of the podcast magazine's 40 Under 40 and was nominated for the 2022 International Women's Podcast Award for Visionary Leadership. After over a decade of coaching clients, Jenn started Salad with a Side of Fries podcast to educate people about nutrition. I think that's how we bonded over the title of that great podcast. As a certified transitions lifestyle coach and consultant, Jenn is typically working out at Physique 57, discovering hidden gym restaurants in New York City, or traveling to spend time with friends and family. Jenn, again, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
I love another Midwesterner.
I know, right? We found out we're actually door to door from where I live to where you were raised is only 3 hours flat. So to
Exactly.
downtown Michigan. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So, like so many of us in this space, I got into wellness through my own, call it a saga. I feel like the word journey like doesn't do it justice. So I sort of joke that I was like the skinny one in a family of dieters. You
Mhm.
know, I grew up a dancer. Somebody in my family was always on a diet. I remember, like there would be times coming home after school. And I remember like asking my dad if I could eat his Nutrisystem because that's what was in the pantry. Or, we participated in every fad diet there was, right? Low carb, no carb, sugar free, fat free, like all the things. We had it all.
Yeah.
And I never really was challenged by it all growing up until like between high school and college. Like so many people, I'd stopped dancing, all the things changed, and I started to gain weight. So I was like, okay, well, genetics seem to be real. And, I guess I know what to do because I watched my family do this. So I was like, what you do is this diet, and then you probably gain the weight back, and then you do that diet, and you probably get right, and you like live on that roller coaster. That's what I was doing.
Mhm.
And there were times in my life where I felt like I would breathe and gain weight,
Mhm.
and then, but because that wasn't my life as a kid, I was like, I don't understand. So fast forward, I was doing, whatever diet at the time. I had my plan and I learned about the curriculum that I now teach that I base my practice on. And at first I was like, no, 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 that's okay. I've got my thing, right? My thing was like this merry-go-round, but I was like, I don't need whatever you have. First of all, I saw people who were following this, program in air quotes because I didn't know what else, and they were keeping the weight off. And then there's this one woman who told her story of losing like 150 pounds
Oh.
and had kept it off. Honestly, I have no idea what her name is. I don't know where she is. I don't know who you are. Like, if you are out there, like, please come find me and tell me it is you. Because everything she said after that, like, I didn't even hear.
Mhm.
Because I was having a conversation in my own head, staring at her. I couldn't see where 10 pounds could have been on this woman. And she's telling me the equivalent of another human was attached to her,
Right.
and it was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I had this moment with myself. It was like, Jennifer, right? Not even Jen. This was like, Jennifer, get over yourself because they know something you don't know. Because
Mhm.
based on what you know, that doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
So I worked with a coach. It completely changed my life. Like the only thing that's allowed me to say I've kicked my food issues. And from there, I set out on a mission to pay it forward and help people help themselves with this information. Because I really felt like it was the nutrition education we're all supposed to know, but nobody ever taught us because they didn't know it. How could they teach it to us? Right. So that was like 2007, 2008. I started health coaching on the side of my full-time job. I was a photo shoot producer. I worked in hedge funds. I did all kinds of things. Left my full-time job July of 2019, launched the podcast Salad with a Side of Fries in August of 2019. And now here we are. I'm sitting with you, Stephanie.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And I'm going to think you're off the diet roller coaster.
Yes.
So you talk about your family openly. And so a lot of people assume that even the weight gain, you talked about that, you thought that this is the way it had to be. But there is some studies being done around things like epigenetics. First of all, talk to us about epigenetics and start by explaining or defining what that is to the audience.
Okay, so let's start by first understanding genetics,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have these genes. It's like, remember back to seventh grade, eighth grade science, right? It's that double helix thing of genes
Right.
that code our biology, right? They code a lot of, right? If we have attached earlobes or detached earlobes or blue eyes or brown eyes or whatever the things are.
Right.
So we understand genes. We learned about that. What is relatively newer, but certainly isn't new, just nobody really talks about it, is what we call epigenetics. So epigenetics is, the way I think of it, is what you bathe your genes in. So the effect of epigenetics is that we can actually turn up and turn down the volume on our genes through epigenetics. So what do we bathe our genes in? It's our lifestyle,
Mm.
right? Our sleep, our stress, our nutrition, our activity, all of the lifestyle things, right? Often we think of nature and nurture when it comes to personality. Think of nature and nurture in terms of biology, right? Nature is the gene, nurture is the epigenetic, what we're bathing that gene in. So, I mean, there's a lot of science to all of it, but suffice to say, we don't actually need to know all of that to know that we're not doomed based on our genetics.
And you say that women aren't doomed to age. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Aging is going to happen, right? That's a
Yes.
function of time. But aging well, or what we think of as aging into frailty,
Mhm.
doesn't have to happen, or it can happen over, a much slower process.
Right.
And again, it comes down to the small choices that we make every day. And it's interesting because, I'll have a lot of people in their 20s who come to me and they're asking questions and they're thinking about things purely from a more aesthetic point of view.
Mhm.
I'm coming at things from the health point of view. And they're like, yeah, I don't care. Talk to me later.
Right.
Right. But the earlier we care, the better off we'll be later. You can certainly, if you think about the epigenetics being this bath, right? We can have more and more water in that bath over time.
Mhm.
So if we need to change the water, we got to do a lot more if we've built up a lot of that water. So the earlier we start, the better, so that we're aging well. But it doesn't mean that we're destined to, you know, what I think we used to think of as older women when we were younger.
Yeah. Yeah. That may fall in line with things that we assume that we have to inherit. Parents have cancer, I'm going to have cancer. Parents have diabetes, I'll have diabetes. Do you agree with that? And if not, tell us why you don't agree with that and what we can do to change that narrative.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yes, we inherit our genetics.
Mhm.
The challenge is what we experience of our health is a combination of the genetics and the epigenetics. So it's really hard as a layperson to look at something and say, is this a function of the gene or a function of how we surrounded the gene? Did we turn up the volume on all of the cancer connected genes? And that's not to say that there are cancer genes, right? Sometimes there are with certain cancers, but more to say, did we turn up the volume on the genes that maybe make us less insulin sensitive? Did we turn up the volume on the genes that make us crave sugar?
Mhm.
Right? A lot of these things. So it's hard as a layperson to see what our parents experience in their health and know what piece of it is the nature and what piece of it is the nurture. And we might look at it and say, well, but my parents and their parents, right? Or my parents and all their siblings. But you know what they all have in common? They grew up in the same house, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's hard, even when we see people living in the same environment, to know how much is coming from that nurture and how much is coming from that nature. So, yes, there are elements of sickness, illness, and disease that are genetic, but a vast majority of what we think is inherited is a function of inheriting lifestyle more than it is the actual genes.
So how are people turning up that volume? You talked about, turning up the volume. What does that look like?
Yeah. Nutrition or lack thereof,
Hmm.
right? Eating highly processed foods, not giving ourselves the building blocks that it needs to function properly. So, obesity, less physical activity, smoking, alcohol consumption, even pollutants, right? Like, what's the toxic burden? Are we living in a place where, we're completely bombarded and overwhelmed by toxins?
Right.
Stress is a major piece and sleep is a major piece. So if we're not getting quality sleep for enough time, so with sleep, it's quality and quantity, right? With stress, it's so interesting. By the way, like all of these could be an hour or 2 hour conversation onto themselves. So,
Exactly.
so suffice to say, right? I think stress is particularly interesting because our biology is still caveman or older.
Mm.
Our modern world evolved way faster than our biology. So when we think about the stress response, that was survival. That was fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
In that stress response, it's designed to be like 20 minutes, right? The whole sort of bell curve of the stress response is supposed to be about 20 minutes. We live in a modern world where we are constantly starting that stress response and we're never finishing it.
Yeah.
So our body has this buildup of a stress response that if we're not managing well and regularly, we might not think we're stressed because this is just life, right? Today was a great day. I'm not stressed out. Your body, the physiology in your body is still holding on to stress from maybe something that happened 3 years ago. And we don't connect it because mentally we've moved on. So there's a lot of elements to this that are at play. That's not to say, like, don't get overwhelmed, right? There's always one, like, we can always start somewhere and make progress, but it's all of the lifestyle things. I think the beautiful piece of it is that none of this is news.
Mm.
Like, it's not news to you that sleep and stress and quality nutrition are great, or, managing all of that is helpful and healthful, and that limiting the alcohol, the toxins, and the tobacco are going to be better for our health too. Like, all of this.
Yeah. So why aren't we doing doing what we're supposed
Well,
to do?
right. So knowing what to do and actually doing it are not the same thing,
Different things, Jen.
right?
Different things.
Yeah. So I come from the school. I believe that bridging that gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it is a function of understanding why.
Mm.
Yes, somebody can tell me to manage my stress or sleep more, but they're not living my life. So go away,
Right.
right? Like we can hear the advice and, push it out the window. But
Exactly.
if we look at the fact that say, hey, wait a minute, I know that right now, this seems like a really good idea to, stay up and watch my show. But that one night of staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning, and then my body actually chemically needing like 2 or 3 days to get back to a normal, a regular circadian rhythm,
Mhm.
makes my body think I'm a shift worker,
Mm.
which we know shift workers have a lower lifespan. There was some research out of the UK that basically a vast majority of the population's biology is that of a shift worker because of our lifestyle habits. So if we start to connect, wait a minute, like I know this TV show sounds really amazing, but like, what if I just slept and then I could actually play with my grandkids or be at their wedding? Like it seems like a giant leap, but it may not be.
I know it. I love the fact that you made that connection between something so simple, something so everyday, normal that we're going to do anyway, and how that actually connects with how we end up living our lives and how our lives are impacted. Are we going to go to that wedding in a wheelchair, or are we going to dance at that wedding? And it could, while one night's worth lack of sleep won't do it.
Totally. Right.
But normally, if your MO is to have one night, you're probably 2, 3, 4 nights per week, and that continues to build upon itself. So I love the way that you made that connection.
For everybody, right? It's about starting where we are. It's
Yes.
picking one thing. I think, coming from the weight management world that I do, I remember every time I was going to start a new thing, right? You show up week one, you are crazy excited, right? You are ready. You get the book, you try to do all the things at the same time. It feels really overwhelming. You're like, oh my God, this is a full-time job. It lasts maybe a week or two, and you're like, forget it.
Exactly.
Right? That doesn't get us to where we want to be. So if we think about all of this of saying, okay, I'm going to focus on one thing this week, and then next week, maybe I add something else to it, or next month. But if we learn something and implement it, and then learn the next thing and implement it over time, we're making massive progress.
I love that. It's about habit building. It's about building
Yeah.
habits and making sure that you can stick with them. That's excellent. I love that. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to switch subjects a little bit because in my mind, I'm thinking about metabolism, and how that actually impacts the body, and even that connection between epigenetics and metabolism. Is there an alignment between the two?
Yeah. So we can think about it in a few different ways. I mean, as we said, right, obesity and lack of nutrition
Mhm.
create a bath around our genes, right? Create the epigenetics
Right.
that are less health supporting
Mhm.
from those genes, right? So the more we, for example, cravings can be connected to certain genes, whether you crave salt or sugar or things like that, they're connected to genes. If I'm eating a lot of sugar and feeding that gene, it continues to express itself.
Exactly.
If I have other things in place, like eating more protein and fiber from vegetables and quality fat, and I'm giving myself what it needs, it's a different bath around that gene where it doesn't show up in the same way. It doesn't impact my life in the same way,
Yeah.
right? Incredibly powerful to understand. So, this is sort of what we call nutrigenomics, or the interplay between nutrition and our genetics.
Mhm.
And essentially, all we need to know is that quality nutrition creates the optimal bath around our genes for better health. It's like turning the volume down on those, challenging genes and turning the ones up on the health supporting ones
Mm.
versus the opposite, which could be if we're always, choosing the other things.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Oh, that makes sense. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Talk about. Let's go a little deeper into metabolism because I may have said it and people are like metabol what like or may not. They may think they understand what it means, but you talk about healthy metabolism. Can you explain what that looks like to the audience?
Yeah. So when we think of metabolic health,
Mhm.
right, the metabolism is basically burning fuel for energy.
Mhm.
It is using fuel properly. So metabolic health is about the process of burning fuel for energy.
Right.
When we have malfunctioning metabolism, right, or suboptimal function of the metabolism,
Yes.
we tend to convert foods into fat more than we use what we eat for energy. When we are not doing some of the sleep and stress things,
Right.
it impacts what happens with the metabolism. If we're not giving our body nutrition that it knows what to do with, it can impact the metabolism. And there are a whole host of organs involved in all of this. So, I'm trying to, I'm big on like, keeping it relatable. Like, we don't have to be a biologist or a physician. Like, I'm not a physician, right? So I just geek out on all of this. So I'm like, how can I explain this so that I would understand it, right? So thinking about it in terms of metabolic health, it's really about, are we converting fuel into energy? Or are we converting fuel into fat?
Mm.
health comes from converting fuel into energy, right? So if we're storing fat as a function of blood sugar,
Right.
burning fuel is a function of metabolically active body mass, the stuff in our body that burns fuel.
Mhm.
Muscle dictates metabolism. Muscle is metabolically active tissue. Just existing requires the burning of fuel,
Right.
or what we would call calories, right? So if we want to improve our metabolism, we need to build muscle.
Mhm.
Muscle dictates metabolism. Now, on the food front, if we are storing fat, it's a function of blood sugar. So if our blood sugar is too high and if our blood sugar is too low, we're storing fat.
Mhm.
So what does this look like? So, and how does that happen? Do you remember the old I Love Lucy show where like the one where Lucy and Ethel are in the candy factory?
Yeah, and the keeps coming at them real fast, and Lucy has to eat them real quickly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So their job in the candy factory was to wrap the chocolates or the candies that came down the conveyor belt
Right.
and then put them back on the conveyor belt for the next station. They were like on their last rope. They were going to be fired. So they had to make sure that an unwrapped chocolate did not make it to the next spot. So when the conveyor belt came at this nice, slow, steady pace, they could do what they were supposed to do.
Right.
When the conveyor belt sped up, they couldn't keep up. And so they were shoving the chocolates everywhere.
Right.
Your body does the same thing. When
Mhm.
food and fuel are coming at a nice, even pace, right? We produce insulin.
Mhm.
Insulin carries the fuel to our muscles and our cells to be used. When the conveyor belt speeds up, we've eaten a high glycemic impact food. So food that's going to impact our blood sugar.
Right.
Like we sit down at the restaurant and start with the bread basket, or we've eaten too much. It's like flipping the switch, speeding up the conveyor belt, everything, right? Our body overproduces insulin to try to keep up with the speed of that conveyor belt.
Mhm.
But our muscles and our cells only take in so much fuel at a time and then they close. But our fat cells, geniuses that they are, never close. Our fat cells are like, I'm open,
Yeah.
come here,
Yeah.
right? I got you. So our fat cells store all that extra fuel and the extra insulin.
Mm.
And we're adding to those fat stores when our blood sugar is too high. The other alternative. So by the way, what that looks like in real life, we go to the restaurant.
Mhm.
We order what we think is like a textbook meal. Like I'm going to have steamed fish and vegetables,
Right.
right?
Right.
If we start with that bread basket, the bread basket is high glycemic food. It's flipping the switch, speeding up that conveyor belt. And now your steamed fish and vegetables is going to be stored as fat.
Oh, that's good. That along with the Lucy
Okay.
analogy, which I'm going to use, that's good. I like that.
All right. So the other scenario is if our blood sugar is too low.
Right.
So that could be, I see it with a lot of men. They're one meal a day,
Mhm.
right? They don't eat breakfast, then they're busy, stressed out, then it's dinner, they're ravenous, right?
Right. Right.
So if we don't eat enough, if we don't eat for extended periods of time, our body, again, that caveman wisdom
Mm.
says no food must be famine. I'm not going to die, right? Our body does not know that there's a refrigerator full of food that we are choosing not to eat.
Right. Right.
Our body thinks you are trying to kill it. So our body says, you won't kill me. I will survive. How do I survive? Fat. Fat is fuel stored to be used later. You know what never comes in our modern life? Later. So we don't eat. We get to dinner, right? Or we don't eat enough. We
Right.
finally eat a quality meal and our body goes, haha, you're not going to kill me now because I got something. And I'm going to store it as fat so that I can survive.
Good.
So when our blood sugar is in these extremes, we're storing fat. Our objective is to eat quality nutrition regularly enough to keep our blood sugar in sort of like this middle range where we're never adding to those fat stores.
I like that. So is this the same for my audience, 40 plus women, or should they be doing something different, or is it exactly what they need to listen to as well?
Yeah, the beauty is human is sort of human.
Mm-hmm.
So this applies all the time. What happens with aging is that we lose muscle mass. So
Mm-hmm.
we want to have a little bit greater commitment to some of that resistance training,
Right.
right? We want to have a greater commitment to the stress management, potentially a greater commitment to adding more protein,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would say protein and fiber at every meal makes your moving fat no big deal,
Okay, I like that.
right? Protein and fiber at every meal makes your moving fat no big deal. Protein is clean, lean protein. Animal, plant, whatever makes you happy, clean, lean protein.
Okay.
Fiber is vegetables and sometimes fruit.
Right.
And a meal is really any time we eat. The only difference between a meal and a snack is how much we have at a time, and then therefore how many hours it might last us till we're hungry again,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we're giving ourselves quality nutrition in that way, we're giving our body the building blocks to do all the things it needs to do. And that helps us as we age. Now, another piece that can happen, especially for women with the hormone changes, is that it might make us more inclined to storing fat. There's a direct connection between estrogen and fat, right? So there are pieces of this that potentially become more important, but it's not that the information or the guidelines in that way are dramatically different.
Right.
It's just slight shifts toward that protein away from some of those higher glycemic carbohydrates, right? We're going to be a bit more sensitive to some of those things.
I like that. This has been great, Jenn. Oh my gosh, I love the information.
Thanks.
I also love when, like, now I'll have a little saying now, that I can quote, and then I'll be able to again remember the Lucy analogy. When that's a good teacher, when someone can step away and remember what they are saying. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Well,
But
thank you.
yes, but I still have two more questions for you. Two more questions.
Okay.
All right. So, what is the best advice you've ever received for your mind, body, or your business?
For all of the above,
Okay.
right? Mind, body, and business.
Or it can be or you can do
Well,
all.
no, I mean, I go on. So it
Oh,
is,
oh, okay, okay.
yeah, breathe and know that everything is going to work out exactly as it is supposed to. Just
Love-
breathe.
I love that. I love that. I've actually been told that I don't breathe. I've been told, like, by my chiropractor, and I'm like, huh, what do you mean? And it took a while for me to understand what she was saying. I'm like, so what you just said is
Yeah.
super important, and it makes a huge, huge difference as well. I love that advice. All right, our audience members, they're sitting in the middle, midlife change going on here. What is one bit of advice that you have for them to control that midlife change?
Think of you and your body as one team.
Mm.
The more we try to fight it, the more resistance there is, right? The harder it becomes. If we can approach it from, I got you, we're going to figure this out together. What are you trying to tell me?
Right.
Right? We're learning to speak the language of the body. And so there's a piece of that, right? So inquisitive, be on the same team. And then potentially this, may have a cost, may not have a cost, but enroll an expert, look to somebody who can help interpret some of that communication while we're still learning it.
That's awesome, Jenn. Tell everyone how they
Thanks.
can get in contact with you.
Yeah. So, all social media, I am at Jenn Trepeck, JENN TREPECK. My website is asaladwithasideofries.com. The podcast, wherever you like to listen, is Salad with a Side of Fries. And I think, I don't know if we sent it to you, but let's make sure we get you a link for everybody to do a complimentary wellness discovery call.
Oh, that would be
So
awesome.
30 minutes, whatever you want, ask me, I'm yours for 30 minutes. And I would love nothing more than to hear from you. Like, what did you learn? What did you know? But here again, what do you disagree with? Let's talk.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Thank you once again so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Of course, of course. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to Hello Hot Flash, where we help you control the midlife change. Make sure to check out the show notes where you'll get all of Jenn's information and make sure you take advantage of that 30-minute complimentary call. You can also find health and wellness information at hellohotflash.com. Here's to your health.